INSO neutral conditions, basically all winter long. And now I don't want to say we're switching, but there's a little bit better chance that we might be developing into La Nina during fall and possibly into winter, which is, I think that's a good thing for us. Typically La Nina events, we do get a little bit wetter conditions as compared to an El Nino event. So, and then as we look forward the next couple months, the 3-month outlook for August, September, and oops, that's wrong. It should be October. I'll change that. Is for above average temperatures and equal chances of above, normal, or below precipitation. So this is the temperature graph, and you can see here the orange and red colors typically mean above average, and that's for temperature. And then we're kind of in this no color zone, which is kind of equal chances of above, below, or normal conditions. So, and that's all I got for now. Any questions?
Anybody weather-related questions? And I think we'll kind of do a short period for questions after each report. Be kind of the schedule. So if anyone's got anything weather-related to ask about, now would be the time to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Really appreciate it. This is an important part of our watching the water.
Yeah.
And you did just get a little bit of rain in Dillon, so the rain dance worked a little bit.
We'll keep it up. We need it.
Right. Okay, so Tan will pull up the director's report, and I'll go through what I've got to share. Welcome to those of you that didn't get a chance to say hi. Okay, well, it's been a very busy time, obviously. The last thing I did normally as part of my normal functioning job was attended the Montana State Water Summit. And I think I commented on some of those happenings. And it was great to kind of see the restoration community and folks that just a lot of good people. One takeaway from that meeting, there were several, but one that really struck me was John Tubbs from the DNRC really acknowledging that maybe for a lot of years, pushing towards sprinkler irrigation and moving folks quickly off of flood irrigation maybe was not a fully informed set of decisions that happened over a long time. And I tried to catch him actually saying that on video on my cell phone, but I kind of just missed the point where he said that. But I wanted to just impart that it really seems like the ecological values of flood irrigation are more and more kind of being accepted. I think that's really relevant for our basin. Not that flood irrigation is the way to do it everywhere in every circumstance, but that certainly made an impact with me. And then COVID hit. We very quickly had the transition. We did, foreseeing kind of an wide sort of economic fallout. We did secure a PPP loan and grant that helped us just kind of covering general operations and payroll. We've also secured some state of Montana funds for the same purposes. So that's helped us financially kind of push our projects and our billable work further on into the year. We had to kind of take a big volunteer event that Ben was planning kind of off the map for this year. Most likely it'd just be too hard to do given all the distancing that has to happen. Obviously we canceled all our meetings for a little while. Mostly our presenters were kind of not ready to really provide, and we weren't quite ready to do these meetings. But I think now that I think we can pull it off, and we're looking forward to at least seeing folks virtually from here on out until the situation changes. Just a big shout out to our staff that just kind of rolled with fit and adapted and changed our work plans and our way of working really quickly and easily. Just, we've got a great team here, and that's really the most important thing, is keeping us all here and keeping us at the capacity level that we're at now. As an organization, we've gone through many years, way before I was here, many years of ups and downs as far as capacity goes, and we're at a good spot now. We're kind of at the place that, and Jen Downing, my predecessor, really worked hard from the economic recession of '08, building the organization, building our foundation and our systems so that we could handle larger capacity and get more work done on the ground. And you all have been seeing the results of that. Just being able to move lots of restoration dollars through the organization and get them on the ground, that takes some doing from a capacity level, and Jen really has set us up well for that. So I had a good steering committee meeting in June with Jim, Randy, Steve, and Roy. Kind of went over where we are, and I think we're all in agreement that keeping the organization where it's at now, and maintaining our current capacity and continuing to deliver projects on the ground, and all this coordination that we do, is first and foremost. So yeah, that'll do for that slide. Thanks, Tana, if you could move it forward. So partnerships, it's a big part of what we do, is staying connected with our partners across usually Western Montana, but into Idaho. I've been doing quite a bit with the High Divide Coordinating Committee. So it's a program of the Heart of the Rockies, if you all know. One of the issues that they're trying to get their minds around is this concept of connectivity. Connectivity, as you all know, it means different things to different people. There's some concern out there that I've heard that just the idea of connecting landscapes for wildlife really needs to be done in the context of working lands and the impacts that wildlife has on working landscapes, and making sure that working lands are a part of whatever efforts we have to improving kind of connectivity as a whole. And that resonated, that message was pretty consistent. So when the Heart of the Rockies came to the coordinating committee asking about this concept of connectivity, and is this something we should move forward with and go find funding for more of this, it was pretty universal among the grassroots groups that make up the High Divide, that we all thought that the impacts, burdens, benefits, and everything of wildlife connectivity on working lands has to be front and center. So I hope I'm representing that correctly, and it's a rich conversation, and for me it's a source of potential future funding and work that can be done. It means lots of, and it can be kind of a loaded word, but in the absence of a better word, which could also potentially be loaded, you may start hearing more talk of connectivity. We're looking potentially with the High Divide, potentially on our own for opportunities through the NRCS for RCPP funding. This is a larger sort of long-term grant program for work on private lands, kind of building off of some of the work that Ben started last year. We're really looking at opportunities to bring conservation dollars to private working lands around the issues that come up most often now. Conifer encroachment, there's a lot of interest in that, getting some of the trees that have been taking over some of the foothills and knocking those back. Ideally, and I've been seeing some good studies that show a real benefit for flows, surface water, groundwater infiltration. There's just a general understanding that our forests are too heavily stocked, and treating those could have substantial benefits for our water situation in the Big Hole. So we see this as an opportunity to potentially avoid some of the restrictions and hoot owls and closures and all of the things that we do for drought management. If we can get out ahead of it and do actions on the landscape that improves that scenario for all of us so that we don't have to use the drought management plan, that's the direction we'd like to go in. So I'm looking for sources of money in a couple different places for that type of work. I'll be going down to the Big Hole with Gary Burnett from the Heart of the Rockies to meet with a funder as well, to kind of look at wildlife conflict funding and making sure that we're addressing a larger landscape. And the Big Hole's a pretty critical area for a lot of more regional groups looking at the Crown of the Continent area or Southwest Montana headwaters locations. The Big Hole comes up quite often, so I'm often invited into these conversations. And then lastly, I did send a video to our congressional and Senate representatives, thanking them for their support for the Great American Outdoors Act. And that passage comes with committed funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's something like $900 million a year. That's guaranteed funding. The Land and Water, for those of you not familiar with Land and Water Conservation Fund, it purchased the Mount Hagen game range, for example. That fund is how the state got to acquire the Mount Hagen, what's now the Mount Hagen game range. So that pot of money it's used a lot for conservation easements. It's also used for improvements to state parks, national parks, and also local parks. So there's an opportunity there through Land and Water Conservation Fund for small communities, along the Big Hole or Dillon, Butte, Anaconda, to make improvements to their outdoor spaces. So outdoor spaces don't have to be, pristine, far away wildernesses or anything like that. They can be in urban areas as well. So I'm all ears as far as projects and project ideas. So bring them our way if something comes to mind, particularly those of you who live in the Big Hole and want to see some improvements in your local communities. Moving on to another big partnership of ours with the CCAA and the Forest Service. If you all didn't hear, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided that the Arctic grayling should not be listed under the Endangered Species Act. It's really a huge victory. It's a huge victory for all the work that's been going on in the CCAA in the Upper Big Hole, for all the landowners that have been doing conservation on their properties. Not listing that species means that the grayling are doing better, and the trajectory is, we're not out of the woods. It's still a very tenuous situation, but what we're doing is working and needs to be continued and furthered. So I've been sort of with some trepidation, but I've been engaging some of the litigants in that issue. Who knows? It may come up again. They may end up litigating again. But in my mind, one of the important things that happened in that ruling is even the litigants said that they thought it was admirable, commendable, and noteworthy, all of the achievements, the conservation that's been done in the Upper Big Hole. So my point to them is, well, if that's commendable, but it's not enough, then let's put some money towards it and really ramp it up. Better that than the litigious route. So that's what I'm going to be pushing for. Who knows if it'll fall on deaf ears, but it's at least a take a shot at it. So that was a big, I think that was a pretty big deal, and kudos to everyone, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, DNRC, folks on this call that have been a part of that. I think it just deserves a big congratulations. So if you can find the little clap thing on your on your Zoom meeting, yay, everybody. It's a super big deal. So in support of that, I think I'm just trying to stay open to our partners there and let them know that we're here and we're here to support in any way we can. So Jim McGee's got a fence pulling project, and we're getting involved by offering up our compost, our carcass pickup vehicle is still in the upper Big Hole, and John Costa will be helping them by removing the fencing that they pull and getting it recycled and out to a dump. So as much of those little type of things, we're game for doing those as often as we can. We're also sitting in on the Forest Service. The Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest has a working group that meets monthly, and we're sitting in on those conversations, just staying on top of where the agencies are doing forest management work and seeing where we can bring additional money in and overlay on top of that, trying to treat basins all at the same time. This photo is just kind of speaking of partnerships, and the photo is of Ben coordinating with the U.S. Forest Service and our contractors out on the Elkhorn mine site, looking at old maps, trying to figure out what's going on there. You'll hear more about that project from Ben here in just a second. Okay. All right. Drought and gauges. I've been involved with the state of Montana stream gauge work group now for really since the last legislative session. So most important thing, number one, is taking this stream gauge user survey. I suspect most of you on the call have taken it already. The really important piece coming out right now from the data that we've collected is it's showing very heavily dominated by recreational users of water. So fishermen, guides, and outfitters, folks that, you know, the daily flows means a lot to their business, and that makes sense. But we need to hear more from irrigators as to their use of the gauges. And the reason why is the whole data set for the entire state of Montana is going to be given to the stream gauge working group to inform them about why these gauges are important, who uses them. So I think that, you know, working lands folks, irrigators, should chime in here on this survey, and their data, every point is important, because what we're pushing for here is some sort of coordinated and consistent funding for stream gauges. Right now, the way they're funded, it's split up among a bunch of different agencies. It took Jen Downing a huge lift to even figure out our own gauges, who's paying for what, where. And some watersheds had gauges all of a sudden blip out when funding cuts happened at the agency level. So we want to avoid that. I'm really just pushing for the state to understand stream gauges as critical infrastructure. We can't manage water without that data. So as many data points as we can get into this user survey, the better. So if you haven't taken it yet, please do. It'll be in our meeting notes, the little scanner thing. You can use your phone to scan that little barcode, or you've got the SurveyMonkey URL there, and it's in all our email newsletters and will continue to be. I think we're going to keep the survey up for another couple months, and then that's it. And that'll be really the only time that at the state level they'll get information about who's using Montana gauges. And then lastly, I've been on the horn quite a bit with Trout Unlimited, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Eric and other guides and outfitters, and just talking about drought response, how the drought plan has been working this year, and some potential shifts and modifications that need to happen to it. So we'll be following up after this drought year. Our drought subcommittee will get together again and discuss those in depth. Sort of work some kinks out. And then lastly, I'll just get to the projects that were kind of on the horizon. We got a planning grant from the Bureau of Reclamation, and this is going to support us to get a design fix for Pennington Bridge is one thing. That's been a sore spot down in Madison County for a long time, and it's a potential major infrastructure issue. We're also going to have some funds to help get our stakeholders in the lower part of the river coordinated and getting together. So guides, outfitters, irrigators, everybody with a stake in that lower stretch from the Notch down to Twin, getting together much in the way the rest of the river is working and cooperating on drought management and working with a plan and setting the right triggers to keep the resource in good shape. So that'll be coming down the pike here pretty soon. We'll be contracted probably by the end of this month. Looking at Clean Water Act money for the 319 program that we have been working with almost consistently for at least since I've been here. The two pictures on your right there are of the headwaters of Oregon Creek and major sediment sources coming off of barren slopes and falling right into the creek. So kind of killing fish habitat. And with all the fish restoration work going on in that watershed, we feel it's important to get at these impairment sources quickly and set the system up right for when FWP does introduce native species into this whole Mount Hagen area, they'll have the best possible chances for survival. Again, looking at some forestry cooperative type work and vegetation management projects, and pitching to a foundation here, a project with the U.S. Forest Service on a tributary of Bender Creek to restore some cold water tributary habitat. Great. And then I just wanted to just give a big kudos to Tana and Ben, and also to Roy for calling us out on needing to do more social media. And I hope he's seeing that we are doing a lot more of it. Tana and Ben have really been doing a great job getting out to the broader world, all of the work that we're doing in the field, kind of trying to keep it fresh as far as where we've been, what we've been doing, what we're seeing, and not just beyond just pretty pictures, but really bringing some science and to the general public about the work that we do and the importance of it. And I'm really excited for the end of this meeting to show off our film that just premiered. And so that's part of us building up our platform of who we are, what we do, and what we bring to the restoration community and the conservation community. And then lastly, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but you know, as we looking to the future, one of the big bottlenecks that I see is the absence of non-federal matching dollars to get projects off the ground. And I think that a locally held conservation fund could really fill that gap. So there's plenty of federal grant money out there. That's what I've seen. We've had good luck getting at those federal dollars. The tricky part is most of them ask you for $1-to-1 dollar match. And when you start looking around for non-federal sources for that match, they're hard to come by. I think that the Big Hole is one of these communities where we're together enough. There's a long enough history. We have the social sort of fabric and foundation under us. And the Watershed Committee has been a sort of trusted partner in this area for over 25 years, that if we were to open a conservation fund, we could give folks a place they could trust to put conservation dollars, and then we can instantly match those dollars 1-to-1 with federal grant programs and continue getting good work done on the ground. So we're getting hit up by our partners at agencies to do projects, and everyone's asking the same thing: where do you have non-federal match? So I think that's a direction that I think that's a hole that we can fill. It's a big lift. It's going to be a big lift, and we're going to roll it out slowly, but just so you all know, it's coming, and I'm pretty excited about it. And it's going to involve really more education, you know, even more than we do now, of the folks that come and visit the watershed and choose to come and recreate in the Big Hole. There's a differentiating factor. Like, Big Hole's different than other places, and I think there's value there. And I'd like to capture some of that value by really broadening the tent, making sure everyone knows that the Big Hole is a pretty big deal. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop talking. And any questions?
have a quick question. Is in non-COVID times especially, would student volunteers on projects or through internships help you with some of that non-federal match since we're state?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And it did actually. So on French Creek, I was able to count your guys' contributions there as matching dollars.
Okay.
So yes, that kind of thing is very welcome. It gets trickier the more intense of a project. So the bigger scale project that you have, if you think about French Creek or French Gulch, Oregon Creek, these larger mechanized operations. So there's a lot of grant money out there that really only wants to pay for shovel ready, kind of getting work done. And so the trouble is when the matching dollars also have to be, construction matching dollars basically. And those tend to be high dollar items. And so we take all the match that we can get from everywhere. But having, actual cash money to help with contractor payments is the biggest sort of bang for the buck as far as filling that match hole.
Fair. I can see them wanting to get paid. It's hard work.
It's hard work, expensive.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, it turns out conservation and restoration takes a lot of diesel. All right, any more questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to, I did talk to Randy. He said he probably wasn't gonna be able to make it and didn't have any specific steering committee update. Steering committee reports, usually no news is good news, unless Roy wants to chime in here from the steering committee.
Sure, I have something to say. I know, Pedro, I know that you took over from Jen with some trepidation and anxiety. And I think I can speak for the steering committee is that we're very happy with the job you're doing and the engagement that you have and the people that you've kept with you or brought, for instance, Ben on. We're pretty happy with the direction you're going, and kudos to you for following through. I think Jen would be very happy with the job you're doing.
Thanks, Roy. Appreciate that. It's yeah, I always joke that I gave up the awesome job, but this is awesome in its own way. It's multifaceted and it's difficult, but it's pretty exciting.
You've made the transition well.
All right. Oh, it's easy when you got a good team. And also a testament to the committee and all of the, I think, just general good relationship building that's been going on in this valley for a long time. I think that really helped. I think just coming with representing the organization, I think helps a lot because it already comes with most people have a pretty good sense of what we're about. All right. Any other questions? If not, we'll go with Tana's wildlife report.
All right, so the Upper Big Hole Range Rider program is going on right now for the 11th year, well, 11th summer. Chet Robertson has been our range rider that entire time. He patrols 6 grazing allotments in the Upper Big Hole, monitoring for predator activity and livestock condition. And the main goal of this project is to help ranchers get reimbursed when livestock does get killed by wolves and bears, or potentially to better would be to deter livestock depredation. So Chet works July 1st through September 30th each year, And this year we have new game cameras, which is pretty exciting. So we've been getting a lot of really great pictures and a lot of photos of wolves. Our game cameras in the last couple of years were really bad and didn't really give us good photos. So it's tough to say if there's increased wolf activity or if we're just getting better photos. But I know it seems like Chet's seeing a lot more tracks this year too. There's also a resident grizzly bear. It's been confirmed by FWP to be a resident, a male grizzly bear living near Jackson. So that is a new for us this year and kind of a big deal. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on and keep working with producers to try and deter wildlife or livestock depredation whenever possible. So funding for the Range Rider program this year came from the Livestock Loss Board and also the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And I've got a couple more slides and then I'll answer questions if anyone has any. The carcass removal and composting program. This is the fourth year of that program. And John Costa is our wildlife program technician. He does a really great job of taking care of the compost site up there by the MDT maintenance shop in Wisdom. And he also drives a carcass removal dump truck. So we borrow a dump truck from the Red Rocks refuge down in the Centennial each year, and John drives it around to the local ranches and picks up carcasses, livestock carcasses, and brings them back to our carcass compost site, which you can see that in the first picture there. You can kind of get a view of our compost site, and down in the bottom right corner is a picture of the actual compost. This year, John picked up 53 carcasses from 9 producers. So the number of carcasses that was actually down quite a bit this year, but the same number of producers. So we think that's probably due to weather. It was a really bad, really tough winter last year. Not quite so bad this year. We also had some press coverage this year. I spent quite a bit of time working with a journalist from named Katie Hill, and she wrote a pretty good article called Composting Carcasses in Cattle Country Keeps Livestock and Predators Alive. So that's actually a link, and it's also on our website, and if anyone's interested, they can just reach out to me directly, and I can send you the link to that. So we're always happy to have press coverage of our programs. New this year, we have livestock, we have loaner toolkits. One is for livestock loss prevention and the other is for bear safety. So the Livestock Loss Board and the Vital Ground Foundation funded for us to put together supplies, and actually I should have put it on there too. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation was also a funder for us to purchase tools to put together a toolkit to loan some or all of these devices to local ranchers, and it includes scare devices, temporary electric fencing, bear spray, resource guides, and more. You can see some of the things in the photo there. So those are available to producers to borrow or test. And we also, the bear safety toolkit includes backpacking containers, resource guides related to bear safety, inert bear spray, active bear spray, and various other bear safety tools. So knowing that we have a lot of black bears here and we have grizzly bears moving in, we want to keep residents on their toes and keep them aware of that. I didn't put it on this slide, but we also offer free bear-resistant garbage cans to Big Hole residents. We've given out, from 2017 to 2019, we gave out 60, and we got another 20 in this last year that I think we have like maybe 10 left. So if anyone is interested in a bear-resistant garbage can, they're in Wise River at the ranger station, or you can also contact me and I can set it up for you to get one. New this year, and this is really Ben's baby, but I'm going to give a little overview, and then if there are any questions, he can answer those, is our wildlife conflict reduction program related to beavers. So the goal is to reduce human-beaver conflict using non-lethal and habitat-sustaining methods. And Ben identified an area near Sugarloaf Lodge where Anaconda Deer Lodge County was really struggling with beavers blocking the culverts. And we know, of course, that beavers can be a really important part of the landscape. And so we wanted to, well, we want to help beavers be able to stay on the landscape while also helping landowners maintain their livelihoods and, you know, not have their culverts blocked up. So BHWC has helped to coordinate the installation of a beaver culvert fence at the Sugarloaf Culvert. And that's the culvert in those photos there. The top photo is last spring. And then I don't think the culvert fence hasn't gone in right yet. It's just planned at this point.
No, it hasn't gone in yet, but we're gonna hopefully install it in the next month.
Okay, great. And then, so that's on private land. And then through that, Ben worked with Vanna Bacadori with FWP to identify an additional site at the Mule Ranch where they're gonna put in a pond leveler. And he's also been working with Alyssa Chott, the Beaver Conflict Resolution Field Technician with the Clark Fork Coalition. And this is an exciting new part of our wildlife conflict reduction program. It's helping us build partnerships with FWP, Anaconda Deer Lodge County, the Clark Fork Coalition, private landowners, and potentially others. So does anybody have any questions about, well, questions for Ben or questions for me about the other wildlife programs? All right, well, I'll go back to the agenda then. So next up is Ben with the restoration report.
All right, thanks, Tana. I'll get my screen pulled up here. Can you unshare your screen? Right. You guys got my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Give me a sec here, folks. All right. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks, Tana. And thanks again for everyone who's participating in this Zoom meeting. I'll make this pretty brief so we can get to our main event and see this new film that we're really excited about. This is the Elkhorn Mine and Mill project. And I've mentioned it in a couple of social media posts and in a newsletter, but I haven't officially talked about it in any meetings or anything like that. So I wanted to give you a brief rundown on this project. I'll give you a brief rundown on what I have coming up this fall. And then I want to give you guys a little photo tour of the success that we're seeing with our Oregon and French Creek projects. But this is the Elkhorn Mine and Mill. It's on the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest in the Eastern Pioneers. Elkhorn Creek's a tributary to Wise River. So this is the area where Coolidge Ghost Town is. And it's a really neat area. There's a lot of history up here, but the nuts and bolts of it are that this was a really big operation. It was a large-scale hard rock mining operation from 1913 to about 1930. And then it was functioning on and off from 1944 to the 1970s here and there. So as you guys all are probably aware of, is that this type of mining activity can cause havoc on the landscape. And that's exactly what happened here. So these two photos show this mill that was present circa 1919 and then circa 1935. These pictures don't really do it justice, because when you get on the site, that mill was gigantic. Yeah, it cost
I don't
some
think Ben, I
you're
don't think
not.
you're showing the right screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry to
jump up
interrupt.
to your first slide.
Yeah, slide.
Yeah.
That's
I'm just seeing Oregon Creek right now.
Oh. Um, Let's see here. I'm showing my screen. You guys aren't seeing my screen.
It says we're seeing Ben Laporte's screen, but it's stuck on the 8th slide, slide 8.
Bear with me here, folks. Yeah, I'm seeing my first slide here.
Ben, maybe you could unshare and then I'll share the screen and just pull up your slides and you can just tell me when to switch.
Right. Let's try one more time, Tana.
Okay.
You got that?
Yeah, that's better.
Now
Okay, so you can see my first slide?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this is the mill I was referring to here on the left side of the screen. And so to make a long story short, from 1998 to 2005, the Forest Service, along with other partnering agencies, did 3 phases of cleanup here. So they cleaned up all these mine tailings that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. They capped that in a repository. They actually rebuilt the historic Elkhorn Creek in the historic floodplain, and they took out a bunch of mine tailings in that area. So the 3rd phase was cleaning up the site for basically human safety. The buildings were falling apart and creating hazards. But they did the first round of cleanup in the early 2000s, but it's still pretty apparent that there's chronic environmental concerns up here. Can you see my next slide?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So the main impairment that we're talking about here is this adit, which is basically a horizontal mine shaft that they went to get into all the mine workings. And these are photos that I took this last June when we went up there for our first site visit. But it's estimated that adit's discharging 150 gallons per minute of heavy contaminated groundwater. And that water is eventually flowing into Elkhorn Creek. And on the far right photo, you can see some discolored water. And that's water coming directly from this adit and going directly into the creek. And, you know, it's pretty mind-opening to see that because it's an impairment that's staring you right in the face. So I mentioned all that Forest Service work because when they were doing their work, they dug a ditch here, and that's the photo that my mouse cursor is on right now. They built this ditch to basically get as far away from the creek as possible and disperse it into groundwater and basically try to dilute it as much as possible before it does eventually hit the creek. But after 20 years, this ditch has failed and in a pretty bad way. So water is actually flowing over the top of this ditch and finding its way into Elkhorn Creek. And the color of the water, it's very, you just tell it's very contaminated. In addition, there's a seep below the mill site that's adding to the contamination as well. So all that to be said, does this display settings showing on you guys' thing? I'll get that out of there. Okay. All that to be said is that we got a planning grant from the DNRC, and we also got a grant from DEQ, 319 volunteer monitoring program to basically pick up where the Forest Service left off up here, and kind of start over. And the purpose of our project is to wrap our heads around the amount of contamination in Elkhorn Creek, where the big sources are, what kind of concentrations are we looking at here. And basically, we're doing a site characterization. We're doing water sampling for heavy metals, and we're going to couple that with a LiDAR flight. And as Pedro mentioned, georeferencing old mine survey maps. And we're trying to wrap our heads around what's going on in the outside and on the inside of this adit and all the mine workings in there. I know from talking with some professionals that entrance to that adit goes for miles and miles and miles into the earth, and it's a pretty complicated system. But we want to figure that out because the end goal here is to slow or ideally stop the water coming from that adit. And it's a big project to bite off. It's gonna take a while, but this is the first steps that we need to take to address this thing. And I'm pretty excited about it, and you'll be hearing a lot more from me on this project as we move forward. But between the monitoring and the sampling, the LiDAR, and the georeferencing, hopefully we can come up with phase 2 of this project and get some more money to keep going with it. Also this week was the first week of our 2020 Anaconda Uplands construction. So I've also been talking about this one for a little bit now, and here we are already in mid-August, but the first photo, the upper photo you can see here is a design sheet that we have. We're working with Pioneer Technical. But this year on the North Fork of California, we're putting in 3 of these spreader dikes. They're basically really beefy beaver dams that we're going to build with dozer and a couple excavators, tie it into the landscape. And really the idea here is to catch sediment, store water, and enhance the riparian area up here. Mainly catch a lot of the contaminated sediments from up the way. As well as these 3 spreader dikes, we're going to put in a large gully check dam. And we also did one of these in 2018 in an adjacent drainage. Here is an example of one on the far right of your screen. With the large equipment, I also have Montana Conservation Corps crew. I've been working with these guys for a couple of years now, and it's a combination of handwork and weed spraying and helping out with the operators. So we have MCC doing handwork, and we're also going to have Watershed Consulting out of Missoula do some handwork for us too. And another cool portion of this year's project design is in this Muddy Gulch area. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to restore a historic beaver dam. We're kind of in the business of doing that, and this is a good example of one of the techniques that we can do that. We're going to lower the surrounding floodplain in this really incised channel. We're going to put in these depressional wetlands that we've been incorporating into our projects, specifically on lower French Creek, and we're going to create a longer meandering through here. So I'm showing you some of the design sheets that we've had with Pioneer Technical on this, and basically it's a very small scale stream restoration project that's going to go through this abandoned beaver dam, and we're also going to dig out some sediment here and create some depressional wetlands right above it too. So riparian enhancement, sediment catchment, and water storage are all the objectives on this project. So you'll be hearing about more of this as we go through. Hopefully next week or next month, I'll have some more updates for you. Also this fall, I'm going to do the East Fork Divide 2.0. So this is the second round of a beaver dam analog project on the Morris Ranch, private section of the East Fork Divide Creek in the Western Highlands. And this is a cool project. This is going to be installing 55 BDAs on 2 separate reaches. And Chris Edgington, who is on this call, has been on this site and has his head wrapped around what we have going on there. But these are low-tech, process-based structures, and you know, they're meant to mimic and promote the processes that beaver do. We're using native materials and with a mixture of wood and sod, and the same thing: sediment capture, water storage, floodplain activation. And you'll be learning a lot more about this in the upcoming video. But the whole Back the Snowpack is the theme on these types of projects. So we're going to be installing this project hopefully in late September if all goes well. Cool. I just wanted to take this opportunity to show off some before and after photos from our Oregon Creek project that we did last year. I haven't really had the opportunity to get these in front of folks. We've been blasting them on social media, but I'm pretty proud of them. I'm kind of honing in my before and after photo skills because I believe that, you know, the photos can tell a lot of stories. So I can just go through some of these photos. We'll do it pretty quickly, but the one on your left here is a downstream reach of our Oregon Creek project. And you can just see how wet we turned it into. We turned it into a functioning stream here. So again, pretty stark contrast here on the before and after, August 1st, 2019 and versus June 5th, 2020. So again, here you can see our new creek channel flowing through Oregon Creek. There's no creek channel in the upper one. Really turning uplands into wetlands here. Here's the plaster piles that we refer to on this far right photo. These plaster piles were a linear feature throughout Oregon Creek that spanned the entire project reach. And you can see what it looks like now. Completely different. Far left photos here, these spreader dikes, you know, these hand-built beaver dam sort of structures, mimicking what beaver do, holding back the water here. So this is June 5th, and you can see the amount of water in through Oregon Creek, where as before, this water was basically shooting off the landscape like a fire hose. This project will be in the video that we show here in a bit, but here's some cool aerials of the photo or the project. And you can just see how wet we're getting this portion of stream. This is during high runoff, and it functioned really the way that we wanted it to, with activating all of that floodplain. That's 4 new acres of floodplain that we created through there and really soaking up the sponge. So happy with the successes of Oregon Creek. Also happy with the success that we're seeing on French Creek. Again, some really cool before and after photos of those projects. You can see on the far upper right, September, what is that? 13th photo. No stream there, going through sedge, going through upland. And we basically punched 4,000 feet of stream right through that sedgy upland and created a wetland complex and a properly functioning stream. So been talking about this one for a while now, but since the last time I was able to see you guys, I got some cool before and after photos, so I just wanted to show them off. I like this one right here. These are the depressional wetlands that I've been talking about here that we built in, that I'm kind of, if you follow my cursor. So that's overflow from the channel, and it's dropping into this wetland, and really it's able to hold the water on the landscape longer. It's a neat feature that I think is going to mature into a pretty cool area for critters and amphibians, etc. So some more photos. They're the exact same location here. Sedge, high and dry. Now there's a river going through it. There's a French Creek flowing right through that zone. So again, some cool aerial drone images that I captured this spring, and kind of gives you a good context of what was going on up here. Again, that chalky, erosive bluff was going straight into the stream. It was pinned up against the linear mining feature here. So the stream was confined in between these two erosive features, and adding about 800 tons of sediment into this system. So completely got the stream away from that area, and basically eliminated the sediment source. And yeah, I like to show these off, and they're on our website. They're on our project page on our website, and I encourage you guys to tell all your friends and family, go check it out. Great, that's all I got, guys.
Okay, awesome work, Ben. For those of y'all that don't know, not to get too much into the inner workings of the committee, but the first few months that Ben was on board, actually after the field season, when he was kind of drinking from fire hose, I had him drink from the fire hose of all the unorganized photos that I'd been taking for years of places. And I think he learned pretty quickly what not to do with project photos and restoration work, and has just been dialing it in and getting really great before after pictures and making sense of it all. So this really helps people see the impacts that we can have on the ground. And it tees us up perfectly for launching our film, because it's the direction that I think I see a lot of promise in, is the type of work that you're going to see. I think there's promise in holding back snowpack for late season flows, for wildlife, for cooling down water, and a whole lot of other things that are important to folks on this call and in the Big Hole. So let's first open it up just to questions for Ben on any of our restoration work before we get to the film.
Excellent.
Ben, this is Chris Edgington. Just wondering what part of East Fork and Divide are you going downstream or upstream with that project?
So we're gonna hit the lower reach again. We're gonna add to the lower reach right by the entrance to their ranch, where it was terribly incised, and then we're actually gonna hit a new reach where I think we're gonna have a lot more potential for that activation of the floodplain. I think it's a mellower reach, so I think we're gonna have more success of getting water out of the channel. So it's below that big blown out dam, if you remember that, not to get in the weeds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
So the year before we did 65, this year we're going to do 55 and try to do them in a little bit more strategic locations.
It's a good project.
Yeah, I'll let you know when we're doing it. Maybe you can come by and help us out if you're interested.
Absolutely. Thanks.
I know yeah.
And that invitation is out for anybody that wants to get their hands dirty doing these projects. For those of you that don't get your hands dirty during the regular workday all day, it's a fun thing to do. Okay, any other questions? Or points of discussion or other topics to bring up that haven't been addressed so far? All right. Well, guys, so let's, Tana, maybe let you cue the film up. So this film is from our Wildlife Conservation Society as part of the deliverable from our WCS grant for holding back snowpack. And it includes footage of various projects of ours and cameos by some of your favorite people. All right, let's roll.
It is often said that water made the West. Western mountains, high elevation snow storage areas permit the gradual release of water through the growing season to the great fertile valleys which nestle in this rugged country.
Things are getting a lot drier in the West. In fact, some places in these last 15 years have only half the surface water they did the 15 years prior. We need to understand ways to conserve that water that we didn't so much in the past. These systems are often so dynamic, they're seasonal, they're wet for a few months and they're dry the rest of the year. Now that we can actually measure that, we can see what reality actually is. And it's something we should be concerned about.
There's only so much water, period. And how we manage it determines on how much benefit for all uses we get.
If we can be more resilient in how we store water, we can actually impede some of that impact that we're seeing. And beaver dam analogs and restoration and channel connectivity are all things that are massively important to make that go.
One of the primary goals of these projects is really being able to store water on the landscape high up in these watersheds.
We're trying to hold back as much water as we can. So later in the year, when it's a really dry month, there will be more available water later in the year for ranchers, recreationalists, and also habitat for fish and wildlife.
Everybody suffers because the water just isn't there. You know, all these studies and all these things give us some knowledge to know when we do get a year where we don't have snowpack, what possibly can we do early in the year to negate some of the problems that may come later.
The most important thing we do is work with Mother Nature. And we have to take care of her first. Second, we have to take care of society. So we have two bosses. One is society, one is Mother Nature. So you have to mimic the forces of Mother Nature to keep her healthy.
Flood irrigators have been doing this work for 100+ years and realized how to maximize water availability for themselves.
I'm a 4th generation rancher on the place. My kids will be 5th. And it's been flood irrigated since the early 1880s, 1883, 84 when it was homesteaded.
What ranchers are doing is they're going into these places, and for generations they've been spreading water across these floodplains. In the same way, water might spread across that floodplain during spring floods, and getting that water into that sponge, which is that broader extent around that creek channel. So some of those techniques are already there. We're trying to highlight how those techniques can be first appreciated and valued, and then translated into a restoration context at different scales. So we do everything from low-tech beaver mimicry structures to highly mechanized floodplain reconstructions.
Not so long ago, this country of ours was covered with sloughs and marshes that served as reservoirs to hold water on the land and keep water tables high and wells full. Beaver abounded in the streams, and ducks and geese swarmed in the marshes.
If you can imagine, even by the time Lewis and Clark got here, we had already eliminated most of the beaver off of the landscape. So the fur trade had already removed beaver from all of these tributaries and waterways.
Today we were putting in beaver mimicry structures in an alpine meadow and an area that historically had beavers, and so we were just sort of plugging up holes in the old structures and able to create a lot of natural water storage in an area that historically had that naturally, to spread out that water, hold a little bit back, recharge the groundwater, and keep it for times when it's more needed later in the season.
And really we're just creating, just like a beaver would, you're just creating a leaky structure that slows the movement of water downstream, catches sediment, because that sediment will pile up in front of this structure and build up the base of the stream so that this stream starts flowing a little bit higher up, so that at a really high flows, it'll start spilling over its banks, sort of wetting more of the landscape.
We always refer to it as a sponge up there. You know, you get the sponge wet and it kind of dribbles out for quite a while.
Think of a hydrograph in western Montana generally. There's a big spike in May and June, and then it just is like straight downhill, you know, as you get into July and August, as that water really is just leaving the landscape and moving downhill. By creating these structures and where you see beaver-influenced streams, that hydrograph, the top peak flows is much more rounded and it lasts longer into the year because you're storing all that water in the soil and this water is moving more slowly through the system. There's a CFS that's quantifiable, and if you start talking CFS in September, August and September, that's what everyone wants to hear. You know, I was up here on Monday and the water was just confined to inside the channel. There was no standing water here. So, you know, this little structure that probably took these guys 20 minutes to build, and it's saturated in here, and it's perched. I mean, it's standing water. So this water will be around a lot longer than it would have otherwise. It would just been flowing downstream and it'd be way down in the Big Hole by now.
Because this was the first one, really large one that we planned on the forest, we really wanted to do it right. So we talked about incorporating quite a bit of monitoring into this one. So we put in a couple different piezometer curtains here, so we were able to monitor kind of the water table to see kind of what changes we saw based on the work that we're doing.
So in one case in the Highland Mountains, where we plugged up several abandoned beaver dams, we did some groundwater models, we laid out some groundwater wells, and using drone imagery, we're able to calculate how much water we stored on the surface and in the ground. That project showed us that in just a 3-acre floodplain, we held back 1/3 of an acre-foot of water.
You see this pool of surface water, but that's really small to the amount of water that's underground and in the soil and in the gravels and charging the whole stream bed and the whole system.
It's not a ton of water by itself, but a bunch of these projects all over our headwater meadows would really make an impact for late season water availability.
Deep in the earth were copper and lead and zinc, iron and all the other metals with which to build a great industrial nation. And there was gold in the sands of western streams. Because of ignorance and greed, we've squandered the riches of our heritage. We have wasted our timber, ravaged our soil, polluted our rivers.
So this was a very popular area for gold mining. The whole French Creek watershed really was hit hard, and they built up these massive placer piles and constricted the stream channel into a linear straight stream. So here we're working with 2 excavators, 2 dump trucks. We're trying to put this system back together and give it a push start to heal itself even more.
The overarching goal here is water storage for the long run. And the stream morphology helps. We're putting the meanders back in there. We're putting in a ton of features that slow the water down and allow greater residence time for the floodwaters and a whole lot more infiltration, meaning that water will pop out of the ground further downstream and be available much later in the summer.
And this is what kind of the stream looked like before our project. Really incised channel, floodplain really perched up. You can see the placer piles in here really just piled up right against the stream, and these placer piles go for days, really.
The placer tailings are really kind of messy to work with, but yeah, it does kind of look like a bomb went off. This is a lot of effort just for some infiltration and some habitat improvement on a relatively small stretch, but it's part of a much bigger picture here. We've got this stream that flows into that stream. It's going to increase the ecologic integrity for miles downstream, just knowing that we have this buffer here.
What I think of when I think about projects in the ground, like it's going on in the Big Hole, is you're making piggy banks. And so when you go into your restoration, you're storing water within that watershed in ways you weren't doing before. And as you store water and you create that floodplain channel health you're promoting, you're creating drought resiliency. And so what happens at that project scale is each time you get that flood and you're saving a little more water, you put some more money in the piggy bank. And then when those droughts come, you have water stored that keeps those things resilient and green. What we also see is a decoupling of climate and how floodplains operate. What I mean by that is, as you do a restoration on the ground, before you do that restoration, most times those systems are closely tied to climate. You get a wet year, you get higher flows, you get green pastures. You get a dry year, you get lower flows, you get dry pastures. As those restoration practices come into play and that piggy bank gets filled up, what happens is during dry years, you still get green pastures because you're operating on that piggy bank.
I just find great satisfaction in doing work that gets that water out and soaking the soil and creates wet environments and wet habitats, because we just know that that's what life needs and that's where life is. You know, this work of sort of holding back snowpack is sort of life-giving work.
We are well aware of the fact that water is essential to the well-being of all living things.
All right. So that film's up on, it's on the YouTube for all to see. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
It was awesome.
Southwest Montana, on public ground managed by Montana Fish, Wildlife.
Montana, make it stop.
800
So we've got those, we've got a lot of our playlists on. So when one video ends, another one of ours should come up, and there's lots of stuff up there. And the team we're always trying to put out more content, give people a better glimpse of what it is that we're up to. Take a couple minutes for any last questions or points, and otherwise we'll call it good. All right. Seeing none. It's been great to see everybody. We'll still report out our meeting minutes like we normally do, and we'll probably plan on being here in this virtual environment a month from now.
Great, thank you. I think it was a really successful meeting. You had 15 at one point, which is pretty darn good. I think it'll build and we'll adapt to this COVID weirdness that we're in right now. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody. Be safe out there.
Thanks. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Everyone.
Good to see you.
Pedro.
Thanks again, Sierra, for the Zoom.
Yep. We'll talk to you soon.